It's called a progress trap. Have you heard of that? It's nothing new, but it's worth a rap. Things we've developed to move fast that add to threat of system collapse. A progress trap can be techno-crack, like cars on gas, radiating gadgets, packaged snacks, or cutting-edge weapons that in seconds can blast foreign siblings in political masks. A progress trap. It's like factory farms producing vast quantities of milk and meat replete with antibiotics, hormones, ammonia, and other treats, while animals and people suffer the beats. Tweet, tweet. What's your beef? How sharp are your teeth? We're sharing knowledge on worldwide college suspicious of Big Brother's internet storage. Are we moving forward or getting slapped? What the frack? I'm an optimistic man, but it's worth assessing the cracks on the turtle's back. Is civilization the ultimate state, or is it the source of illness we can't escape? I ain't pretending to be the great light of trees, but I do believe in asking questions and adopting inventions only if they truly support our needs. Can you feel the same breeze? It's whistling past us while the continents bleed.
You're living, thinking, mad, deadly, worldwide communist gangster computer god secret overall plan, worldwide living death Frankenstein slavery to explore and control the entire universe with the endless stairway to the stars, namely the man-made inside-out planets.
Displayed, inducted, and the worms crawl, and the worms fall higher and higher and higher and higher. Depraved, corrupted, displayed, inducted, and the worms crawl, and the worms fall higher and higher, higher and higher, higher and higher and higher, higher and higher. And now I'm lying here, just a rotten cadaver, and I wonder where I was before I came here to this war. But the mud closed over me, closed my eyes to never see. All my friends are here with me now, all the dreams we'll never know, and all the fears I'll never hide. Madness eating, trapped inside. Higher and higher. And no one here is left whole. There's nothing to regret. Oh, I cannot feel, I did not choose, and I don't wish to be. I hardly see who I am, and I certainly hate being free. Higher and higher, higher and higher and higher and higher. Higher and higher and higher. the hell are we fighting for? It's a jigsaw, it's a cold war. What the hell are we fighting for? What the hell are we fighting for? What the hell are we fighting for? It's a jigsaw, it's a cold war. What the hell are we fighting for? Demons come and demons go. Where they come from, we don't know. Demons come, demons go. Where they come from, we don't know. One is one, one is two, one is three, they're all the same. And the tower's falling down, crushing you beneath the ground. It's a jigsaw, it's a cold war. What the hell are we fighting for? What the hell are we fighting for?
All right, welcome to the program, everyone. We want to take a minute here at the outset to speak to the tragic events that happened in Orlando, Florida this last week. Nobody that listens to this program needs to be reminded of the event of the tragic shooting at the nightclub in Orlando. I've spoken, those of you that know me and follow this show, I've spoken extensively about my training as a religious scholar and my thoughts on what I think is going on here in this part of the world, and at least a shadow of some of the things that have really cast their horrible, horrible shadow over most of modern civilization. And I've spoken and written extensively about what I've referred to as a virulent Abrahamism. Abrahamism, the family of religions that follow a deity that sort of after the fact has been called Yahweh. These are three religions related to each other, not only geographically, but theologically and philosophically. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, speaking of them in chronological order. It is my firm belief that any system, any hegemonic system of power in the world, no matter how small or how big, must be subjected to constant analysis from the people that it proclaims power and authority over. When we discuss whiteness as a ideological construct, we don't do it with the aim of harming or harassing or speaking ill of every single white person. When we discuss maleness as a construct in the world in terms of power differentials, we are not saying every man on the planet is a bad person. When we discuss Americanness and American hegemony, we are not discussing that every American is a bad person. When we discuss capital and some of the ravages hoisted upon the living from the devastation of aggregated capital, we're not saying that capitalism itself or anybody with a $20 bill or $1 million in their pocket is a bad person. We are saying structurally, these institutions were created to serve a certain purpose, and as the world grows and changes in complexity, as we have new, very, very serious needs on the planet that affect everybody that lives here, these systems need to be reevaluated to determine how well that they are serving humanity. And we get this with whiteness and with maleness and with Americanness and with capital and with guns. One of the things we don't get it with is religion for some reason. When I try to speak to this issue, we get in this fractured component we get into this notion of, Islamophobia. The right wing wants to blame all of this on Islam, and the left rightly calls bullshit on that and wants to avoid that. But in so doing, falls into this, what I think is very damaging binary thinking. I think to try to pin these kinds of shootings and these kinds of attacks on Islam is short-sighted. It's bigoted, a little bit racist, and something we should avoid. Having said that, a serious conversation about the effects that virulent Abrahamism has had on our culture, I think, is something that is long overdue. The old story in Egypt about when one dies, they go into the underworld, and eventually, after several trials, are brought to a place where their heart is put onto a scale. It's the scale of Anubis. And if the heart is weighed against the feather, and if the heart is lighter than the feather, then the person is allowed into the afterlife. If the heart is heavier, then they are immediately devoured by a dog, jackal-style creature that is there. And the idea is that what have you devoted your life to? Have you devoted your life on balance? None of us are perfect vessels, but on balance, have you devoted your life to spreading love, harmony, connectivity, truth, and goodness, or have you devoted your life to the opposite of those things? And it is my firm belief, and maybe some of you share this, maybe you don't, that on balance, this family of religious traditions that fall under the umbrella of Abrahamism would have a difficult time with its heart on the scale of Anubis. When we look globally at the ravages, especially when the goals of what I'm calling virulent Abrahamism come in line with aggregated capital, and I'm thinking specifically of institutions like the Bank of England, the Saudis, Zionist Israel, the Federal Reserve, the Vatican, these institutions where we have an aggregation of not only capital, but of this entrenched patriarchal, hierarchical pyramid culture. Not too far behind that will come a ravage of the earth, a ravage of women's bodies, a ravage of indigenous peoples, and constant assault on members of the LGBTQ community. Just a question for this week, and then I'm going to get to this week's guest. But I just feel like this needs to be addressed on this show. Ask yourself how many churches, synagogues, and mosques in the United States this weekend will use the time. I'm not talking about a moment of silence, and I'm not talking about a one-off prayer for the people in Orlando. I'm saying of all of the churches, synagogues, and mosques in the United States, how many of them this Sunday and every Sunday forward are going to devote themselves and their resources and their people and their influence to doing anything that they can to make sure that something like this never happens again in the United States? Right? Again, moment of silence, a prayer, thoughts, fine, right? But how many of these institutions do you think are going to devote themselves, like the rest of us need to be doing, to making sure that something like this never happens again? And I think if you're honest with yourself and maybe even go do a little bit of research, call every church in your town and ask that very question. And when the answer comes back, and not only every church, every synagogue, and every mosque, and you'll find a handful that do, but when it comes back and you realize that probably 5 to 10% or less of these institutions are going to do that, then this notion that it's the extremists, the outliers, that are causing this problem will hopefully fade to the background, and we can start having, just like we're having on gun control and on constructions of masculinity and on all of the other systems we've built to enshrine power and oppress people, maybe we'll start having a conversation about this one as well. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's something that we as a people and as a species need to have if we intend to survive on this planet. This is not about hating a religion. This is not about blaming people that are people of faith. This is about saying, what kind of civilization are we? What are our values? What do we want to be? Who are we as a people? I saw a movie a few years ago called Lord Save Us From Your Followers by a wonderful man actually here in Portland, Oregon named Dan Merchant. who's a creative person, a brilliant man, and a very loving person. He made a great film about his own faith called Lord Save Us from Your Followers. And in that film, he tries to go around the country and talk to people about why there's this chasm between people who believe like he does and people who don't. And he has a lot of conclusions. I highly recommend watching the film, and I think it's a beautiful and compassionate film. And in the film, he does things like goes to a pride parade here in Portland, Oregon, a pride celebration, and sets up a confession booth. But in it, he doesn't ask for gay folks to come confess their sins to him. He confesses to them about his own homophobia, about his own complacency during the AIDS epidemic, about his own gay jokes. It's a really profound kind of switcheroo, and it's a very moving scene. I've shown the movie in my religion class and in a couple of writing classes, and I cry every time through these segments. It's a very moving thing. But there's a conversation he has in the film with a gentleman named Tony Campolo, who is, again, a very compassionate, brilliant, and considered a very moderate Christian, too moderate by many of the folks that I used to know when I was an evangelical pastor for almost 10 years. And Campolo says something interesting in the thing. He's telling a very horrific story about a gay kid who was harassed and bullied in his high school growing up in, I think, Philadelphia in the 50s, so much so that the kid ended up going home and committing suicide one day after one of these bullying sessions. And Campolo says, he knew he wasn't a real Christian when that happened in his school, because if he was, he would have stood up for that kid. And it's a very moving thing, and it's a very powerful thing that he says. But right after that, he says, you don't have to legitimate somebody's lifestyle in order to love them. And I was like, well, I think here is the crux of this problem, because this is coming from a moderate religious or moderate Abrahamist, not just a religious person. Cherokee don't talk like this, right? Unitarians don't talk like this. A moderate monotheist says we don't have to legitimate someone's existence in order to love them. And I think that's exactly what we have to do. I think if you have a worldview that says a gay person or a vegetarian or a woman or a pagan or a dwarf or somebody with fucking hazel eyes has less of a right to be on this planet than you do, or that the sovereign creator of all things is waiting to put you into a burning, fiery pit of suffering forever because of who you love. But me personally, I love you and want to try to protect you. You don't get it both ways. I think it's time to draw a line in the sand and start making people declare you don't get to say you love people and at the same time you believe in a deity that doesn't want them to be on the earth, that wants them obliterated, that is just waiting for them to die so he can put them into a pit of boiling fucking water. You don't get both. Right? And so we as a culture really need to start having an honest conversation about this. And I think we ignore it at our peril. We have fallen into the grips of this PC nonsense and allow ourselves to be obliterated in the process. There is not an organization on this planet that has caused more harm than virulent Abrahamic monotheism coupled with aggregated capital. That is globally true, and that is true locally as well, whether we're talking about opposition in this country to LGBT rights and same-sex marriage, whether we're talking about women's bodies and reproductive rights, whether we're talking about stem cell research, the teaching of science, sensible climate policy, the legalization of cannabis. You pick the social issue. Death with dignity laws, and then go look at what the primary sustained, funded religious opposition is to that in this country and around the planet, and you will find your culprit. Anyway, that's as political and religious as we're going to get for this show. Our guest this week is Douglas Rushkoff. Boy, if he listens to this intro, he's going to wonder what the fuck I'm talking about. And if I've alienated any of you listeners, I'm sorry, but I had to get that off of my chest. All love and support and hope for the victims and the families and for anybody who is a victim of hate, because it's really my belief that this is a crime first and foremost against the LGBT community, but behind that it is a crime against all humanity and all of the living, and whatever we need to do together to move to a place where we don't keep waking up to these kinds of things, I'm on board. Our guest this week, Douglas Rushkoff, if I can shift gears entirely 90 degrees for a minute. Although a lot of our conversation centers on Judaism, Douglas makes a phenomenal comment midway through our conversation when he says his understanding of Judaism is that it is there to help you get out of Judaism, to transcend Judaism. That blew my mind and falls very much in line with philosophically and ideologically how I understand the religion. What we find ourselves in is a time of these oppositional and fractured narratives, these scripts that provide an operating system for our consciousness that somehow have become fractured, divisive, and separated from one another and separated from the living earth. And Douglas has written and spoken and made films that speak directly to this. He's a professor of media theory at CUNY in New York and has written dozens of best-selling books on media, technology, and culture. He won the Neil Postman Award for career achievement in public intellectual activity, number 6 in MIT's ranking of the top 10 public intellectuals. And when we spoke about this, I thought it was really interesting because this wasn't a ranking of popularity. It wasn't a ranking of people who've necessarily sold the most books or had the biggest media empires. It was a ranking of intellectuals whose ideas were the most important, according to this MIT algorithm, were the most significant in understanding where we are and where we're going as a species. And Douglas has devoted his life to talking about this and writing about it and talking with people about it. Literally written dozens of books on media and technology and culture. His newest, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, How Growth Became the Enemy of Prosperity, argues that we've failed to build the distributed economy that digital networks are capable of fostering. Instead, we've doubled down on this industrial age mandate of growth above all. And we're going to talk a lot about that in our second segment. In the first segment, we talk about a lot of his other books, Program or Be Programmed, Coercion. We talk about his book, Nothing Sacred, and Present Shock as well. He's a prolific author, a profound thinker. And we are just blown away to have him on the show. I just want to say a couple of things about that. You know, we started this show close to a year ago now with the idea of talking to people who were engaged in living authentic lives, doing beautiful things, right? It's more than our slogan. It was really the mission statement of the show. We wanted to go to those places at the edges of creativity and transformation and examine the connection between those two and how people were sort of navigating those two spaces to do relevant things in the world. And when I first put the idea for the show together and then had the great team come, Celeste Gurvich, Ira Stevenson, Mike DiNapoli, help us get this thing off the ground, we made a long list of folks we wanted to talk to. And then on that long list, we ranked everybody. And, in the top 10 of folks that I wanted to speak with was Douglas Rushkoff. I became aware of his work when I was 17 years old, way back in the Paleolithic time. And when I was that shy, awkward, frumpy, self-loathing little teenager, if you would have told me that at this point I would be sitting with one of my intellectual heroes as a peer, as a colleague, talking about all of the ways that we have both devoted ourselves to studying and understanding and celebrating and sharing the wisdom that comes to us through our work and through the communities that we love and have embraced us, about the deep connectivity of all the living. If you would have told me that I was going to have that opportunity at some point, I would have laughed in your face. And this show has afforded that opportunity. And this show exists first and foremost because of the labor and sacrifice of this wonderful team that I work with, and also because of the fact that there's listeners, right? If we could make this thing every week and put it on the internet, and if nobody listened, it wouldn't be a show. And then we wouldn't get guests booked, right, who have books and things that they want to talk about, because if they could see that no one listened to the show, there would be no reason for them to come on. Douglas is a very busy man who, as you'll hear in the interview, had 10, 20 interviews booked that day as well. So the fact that he even took the time to come speak with us is a testament to the fact that this show is doing something important in the world, and that is gauged by the fact that there are people out there listening to it and that find the show meaningful. So thank you, audience, for being there and helping a lifelong dream of mine come true. I just don't know what to say. I'm blown away with gratitude and humility over this. I'm still on cloud nine over the fact that I got to have this conversation. And it was substantive, and it was fruitful, and it was too short. Douglas has agreed to come back on the show at some point, and that's going to be great. We'll get him on, and I'll be able to ask him all the things that I didn't even get to in this conversation. It is a wide-ranging conversation. We cover a lot of territory. He's a brilliant guy. He's a funny guy, and we sure enjoyed having him on. Look, if the first part of the show, if the first part of this host intro freaked you out or bored you or confused you, this is certainly the longest I've ever talked at the beginning of a show, then my apologies go out to you. But I have a professor of religious studies. I've devoted my life to studying the mythological traditions that humans have developed and gone to in order to make sense of and access and expand symbolic and mythological consciousness. And I firmly believe that some of these systems are better geared than others at helping us create an integrated, ecological, and sustainable new world. And to the extent that any of these mythic systems can be used to help us navigate and create that new world, they are welcome on the boat, right? But to the extent that they oppose that and stand in the way and make claims and judgments about how certain people and certain lifestyles and certain ideologies and the way people love and who they love determines the legitimacy of their right to exist on the earth, we have to come to the end of that thinking, folks, or it will continue to undo us. All right. We love you all. Douglas Rushkoff, really on the top of list of folks we wanted on the show. After this, we're looking for Alice Walker. We're looking for Peter Gabriel. There's only 2 or 3 other folks that hit the level of a guy like Douglas in my mind and in my heart. So thank you, Douglas, for being on the show. Thank you, listeners, for making it a show. And we hope you enjoy it. All right. We will see you folks on the other side.
A podcast about authentic people doing beautiful things. Enjoy the show.
You ready to roll?
Always.
Okay, welcome to the show, folks. This is your host, Andy Gurvich, and our guest this week is Douglas Rushkoff. I have a longer bio for you in our host intro, Douglas, but I'm going to do a short one here. If I read your entire bio, the show would be over.
Cool.
Douglas Rushkoff is author of over a dozen best-selling books on media, technology, and culture. He's a professor of media theory and digital economics at CUNY Queens in New York. Winner of the Media Ecology Association's first Neil Postman Award for Career Achievement in Public Intellectual Activity. I want to ask you about that. And I want to embarrass you. Maybe this won't embarrass you. Number 6 in MIT's ranking of the top 10 public intellectuals. Rushkoff is an author, teacher, documentarian who focuses on the ways people, cultures, and institutions create, share, and influence each other's values. Douglas, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be with you.
My first question is, what do we got to do to take those first 5 people down off the MIT list?
Oh, I'm sure they're good people. I mean, it's interesting. It was a list of, they used, some social media algorithm networking map to try to figure out. It wasn't like who's the most important, but they were looking at who are the most influential intellectuals as measured, by their various parameters. So there were some good people. It was like, Richard Florida, I think, was number 1, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
He's the guy that did the cultural creatives thing. And David Graeber was just above me. He's the guy that wrote Debt, the 5,000 year history. And so it was people. It was interesting. It was people who. It wasn't like the Pope or the head of the NBA,
right.
or the CEO of General Electric.
Yeah.
It was. Do you think that was interesting?
Bezos or somebody,
No, it wasn't. I mean, even though they obviously have more influence through their decisions, it was more like, to me, it looked like kind of what's on the horizon, who's speaking in generally, kind of progressively about where we're going, where we're heading. So it was an interesting. It was an interesting exercise for them to do. I don't take it too seriously, but sure, I'm pleased to just that they know who I am is victory enough.
I was going to actually ask you, because a lot of times when these things come out, of these rankings and these accolades, I don't know how folks like you take them, and if they mean something, maybe they increase your quote, maybe they don't, and but even beyond that, how do you process or handle something like that? And it is MIT, so I know it means something more than just People Magazine's ranking or something. But I think the way you just explained that, I think it probably does mean a little more, because it shows that somebody's paying attention to the quality of the work, right? Not just reach itself, but transformation.
I mean, I'm sure most people would look at the list of top 10 and look at all those names and go, who?
Yeah.
It's like they know, Donald Trump and Ashton Kutcher, and they know, there's fame and intellectual influence might be two different things.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's fine. It's fine. It was just good. It feels almost more like an inside joke than an accolade. But it was a fun thing to get, and by some data, right? It's MIT.
Yeah,
so
no
there's
kidding.
Some data somewhere. I'll go to my
that proves this. Yeah,
put it on my tombstone. MIT says.
I want to back up before we go forward, and I want to talk to you a little bit about present shock and some of your earlier books before we maybe in our second segment get into throwing rocks for a while. But I just want to let our audience know a funny story, at least to me. You and I were supposed to have this conversation several weeks ago when you were here in Portland, Oregon, and we set it up. You were very gracious to afford us some time with you, and then I completely blew the meeting off. I thought it was the following Friday. So I'm at home working on...
It's all right.
Yeah, I'm at home working on, whatever the hell I was working on, grading papers or something, and I get this email from you, aren't we supposed to meet today? And then it was like one of those moments where my whole life flashed before my eyes. I was thinking about it afterwards, and I'm so glad you're with us today and agreed to still do the interview, and I'm equally glad that I'm with us today, that I decided to show up for this interview.
We've done it.
I was trying to compare it to other famous blow-offs, and I read a story once about, have you been to Vesuvio's in San Francisco, that wonderful bar that's right next to City Lights? There's a story about how Kerouac sat there at the bar and when he was supposed to drive down into Central California and meet Arthur Miller, and blew him off and sat there drinking instead. So I thought maybe we've arrived in this business by the caliber of the meetings we blow off. I'm thinking of it that way.
Well,
but appreciate you being with us.
I'm sure the universe wanted us to meet now and in this way, not face to face. I guess it would just be too much for us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know if you remember, we did come down to meet you at Pal's, my wife and I. We talked a little bit about it.
Right.
And again, you were gracious. It was a cool meeting. In no particular order, I want to ask you a few questions that I've been dying to ask you. I watched a video, and again, we'll do a little hodgepodge here, and then we'll jump into the book. I watched a great, very moving video you did about Robert Anton Wilson, a kind of open digital letter to him a while back after his passing. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that. There was something you said in it that was really moving to me, and you said of all of those kind of luminaries from the day that you've had the pleasure and the ability to be around and know, he was the guy that you most liked being around, or that was the easiest to be around, or something along those lines. And I was wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, the sad but true reality is, a lot of us write really great things and idealistic things, and if you read someone, you might project that they're a certain kind of person based on what they've said or their contribution to the world. But, you meet them and they can turn out to be kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
It's just it doesn't take away from their work. It just, it's not a person you want to be around, and you might spend a whole lot of effort getting to finally get into someone's inner circle and get to meet them. Although I guess these days, in some ways, it's easier to connect with people than it was in the old days. All the various rungs you'd have to go through to find the right scene and get in, and the right books and the right places.
Sure.
But Robert Anton Wilson was really the only one and I met them all. He was the only one I met who, it was just like, Uncle Bob. He'd ring on the bell, come in, have a beer, sit on the couch. And it was just so relaxed and so real. And I think it's partly because he didn't take himself seriously.
Yeah.
In some ways he took everything seriously and nothing seriously, which was part of his whole philosophy. But a lot of the others, you go into their homes. I had friendships with these folks. Timothy Leary is a great example, and he was friendly and supportive and superlative, and he'd blurb anything anybody wrote, and he would support people's careers and do all sorts of wonderful things. He gave money to people who were starting zines, who he barely knew. But you go into his home, and it's something to deal with. He's a powerful personality, and he demanded a certain kind of respect and behavior from those around him, and he would ban people from the house. It just it ended up, a lot of these guys, it'll end up feeling much more like a social cult or an intellectual cult around them, rather than just hanging out. And Bob was someone you could just be with, and it just, the more you knew him, the deeper your understanding of him and his work went, as opposed to it being this kind of, cognitive dissonance between, okay, I'm having this experience of this person, but I'm still going to like their book.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it leads to a question about the whole scene, and maybe even into burner culture a little bit, about people that work in that realm and have these transformative kinds of ideas, but because of the nature of the conversation and because it exists on the margins, and because of human nature, it's a kind of perfect cocktail to create these cults of personality. And how do we navigate that, right? And I think Bob was a person that didn't buy his own press in a lot of those ways. I'm a professor of a lot of things, but of mythology and of world literature, and I use his Joyce criticism all the time. I think it's top notch. There's just really nothing quite like his understanding of James Joyce. And I saw a documentary he was in about cannabis legalization, and he said the funniest thing, it was when his illness had returned, and he was in the wheelchair, and he was talking about George Bush and his cannabis prohibition, and he was just railing at the guy and what a fucking asshole he was. And then he pauses and takes a deep breath, and he goes, well, he's becoming Buddha too, but the son of a bitch doesn't know it yet. And I remember just cracking up, man. You were, am I mistaken? You were in the room with Tim Leary when he died, was that correct?
Not at the moment, no. I was there, the months of dying, but I actually had to run to some conference in Boston.
Okay, just after.
For that night,
and
I was actually only in Boston maybe 18 hours, but that was when he went. But I was the guy who, from this ridiculous conference at Harvard about computers or something, I was the one who called AP, the Associated Press, to tell them. And I was like, how do you register a death?
Wow, no kidding.
It was interesting, but yeah. So I was the announcer, I guess, of it. And moments later, the helicopters from CNN are flying over the house, and it was a
remarkable time.
Yeah, it was a remarkable time. Yeah.
Can I ask you about a couple of books now?
Sure.
I want to start, actually. I said I was going to ask you about Present Shock, but I want to start with Nothing Sacred. If you don't mind. Everyone asks you about all of your other texts, but I think this is a neglected one sometimes, and I think people should get this book. It's about, and I'd like you to maybe tell us the premise of the book, but it's about your thoughts on Judaism and its connection, to your own life and your own experience of the faith of your past, but then how it connects to your understanding of media theory as well. And I wonder if you could maybe speak a little bit to that, and then I have a couple of questions for you about it.
Yeah, I came at the subject myself on a number of different ways, but I guess I was looking at the time for a kind of a philosophical or almost intellectual framework for open source, which was a really new thing at the time.
Yeah.
How do we deal with an open source medium or an open source participatory media space where anybody can say anything and and beliefs become more fluid and everyone's perspectives are being embraced and made part of this new very multifaceted understanding of our shared experience.
The Cathedral and the Bazaar was a book that spoke to that.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. And but I was looking sort of how do we navigate that as people, not just as necessarily as programmers or businesses. Okay. So I was trying to really apply the in some ways the open source ethos of the digital era to Judaism as a way of demonstrating that Judaism had that open source ethos to begin with. And I made the argument that Judaism was less a religion than the process through which we get over religion. That sort of calling it a religion and giving it a sanctuary and putting it on the block with all the other religions isn't really, to me, isn't so consonant with the underlying kind of a purpose and function of Judaism, which was, it was really made up for the survivors of the death cults of Egypt who had escaped, and tried to, they created a foundation myth that all these tribes are actually part of the same, ethnic group. But, more importantly, it was a new tradition that was about literacy and participation. So, when to get into Judaism, instead of kind of falling back as an act of faith or stating that you believe in this God in this way, Jews, you do a b'nai mitzvah, a bar or bat mitzvah ceremony, which is a demonstration that you can read this text, that you can speak intelligently about it. And once you can do that, you're allowed to have a seat at the table with all the old guys and argue. And that this is I was sort of writing this at a time when Judaism, institutional Judaism, was getting very afraid that Jews were intermarrying and that Judaism was becoming too diffuse.
Yeah.
And they were very busy spending a lot of money counting Jews. They would do these surveys. How many Jews are there? How many are left? How many more are there since the Holocaust? Are there less? And projecting forward and doing all this number stuff. And I was arguing, look, that's not a way to attract people. It's like, stay Jewish or there's not going to be any left.
Right.
That what you can do is make an invitation to an approach to social justice, a way of participating in making the world a better place. And that's the real purpose of all this stuff. We developed monotheism as a way of taking people's eyes and attention off idols and onto one another. The central image that I use in the book, it's from the Torah, is when the Jews are building that first ark, the Ark of the Covenant, out in the desert. They build it exactly like the kind of ark they would have built in Egypt, except in the Egyptian ark, you would put a statue of the god on top of the ark, whether it's a calf or the lion or whatever the god is.
Sure.
And the God's instructing the Jews what to do in Torah, and he says instead of putting something in the middle, leave that space completely empty and put two cherubs, one on either side of that empty space to protect its emptiness. And there, between the cherubs in the empty space, that's where I'll come to you. That's where I'll speak to you. And it was really interesting to me that, I get it. What Judaism was trying to do is, rather than have this concrete God you worship, it was trying to create an empty space for human connection to happen, and the purpose of the images is more to protect that space than. So I came up with this book. The idea was nothing sacred, that the process of Judaism is getting over all of the things that you hold sacred so that you can actually be with the other people, which is the only thing that you should hold sacred.
I think that's really profound. Now, let me ask you, would you make a distinction there between say Reformed and Orthodox Judaism. And the reason I would ask is because you talk in the book about, some wonderful concepts that you can elaborate on at your pleasure. Judaism being dedicated to media literacy, requiring community participation. And one of the things you talk about in ritual is that rituals are broken up in a way to give people a sort of distance from the stories, and so they don't over literalize them and then lose their symbolic kind of living quality. But then you equally talk about the danger that comes from a kind of fundamentalism, and you talk about fixed narratives, which get us into these oppositional ways of thinking that come from fundamentalism. And the reason, let me just quickly qualify the question, and then please go off on it. I've been thinking a lot about this for a long time. My own work centers on this, and especially since this Orlando shooting, I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about what I've been calling, virulent Abrahamism, especially as when it lines up with the goals of aggregated capital, and that's what can maybe lead us into the throwing rocks conversation later. But the question that came to me is, if we took the heart of Abrahamism and put it onto the scales of Anubis in Egypt, and how would it weigh these three traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in terms of their overall contribution to sustainable and ecological human balance in the modern world. And to me, religions they're algorithms, right? They're these technologies for accessing and expanding symbolic and mythological consciousness, and ones that, for coming from this kind of Campbellian or Jungian place, ones that open us to the transcendence that exists behind the form, function well in the hearts and minds of people, and do create that kind of equilibrium. Ones that close then move from being an identification of, or a religion of identification and relationship, to one of worship and hierarchy. And then once that's institutionalized, then we start seeing these kinds of problems. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to the division there, because the kind of thing you're explaining, right? Some would argue that the big three religions don't represent open source. They represent, corporations and Microsoft and all. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think they start with a certain purpose, and then either human nature or corruption takes them in another direction. So, Judaism, it forbid imagery, and Torah, it wanted to keep everything text, so it remained sort of, fungible and interpretable. Even the text was supposed to be written as flames, so you never saw it as set in stone, but rather this living, breathing document, more like the Constitution than a history. And Jews at the time, Torah Jews back then, they knew these things weren't literal. They knew the sons of Jacob are caricatures of the various tribes, that have been turned into characters. They understood the metaphor of this thing. The problem is, over time, in Judaism's case, part of the problem is that, and this is where I got into all the trouble and people started to hate me, but the Jews, in wanting to claim Israel as the official homeland of the Jewish people, which is one thing, the Jews started to use Torah passages as proof. So if it says this in Torah, it means that God gave us this piece of land.
Right.
So once you're using a transcendent document like Torah, this infinitely interpretable, beyond masterwork piece of transcendent literature, and you're saying, no, this is a real estate document, this is our land claim, then you have to collapse all of that dimensionality in the document and treat it instead as sort of letter of the law, literal truth. So once it's literal truth, then, it's so boring. So, I get it. Now Torah is the exact chronicle history of these people, rather than these transcendent combined mythologies with all sorts of lessons. And the whole idea of Torah, and particularly Midrash, which is the conversation around Torah, is that it's all sacred. Every Midrash that every person does, no matter what your interpretation is, it's still considered sacred, even if it's stupid. Right. It's sacred. So But we lose all that when we want to set it down.
Yeah,
or you take Jesus, great guy, and he was saying, look, you Jews, you're starting to take the law, and he's a rabbi, right? You're taking the law too literally. So now if you're actually going to take the literal law, we've got to stone sorceresses to death, or kill gay people. And
Sure.
Hold on. So that couldn't be right because we're not horrible people. We're not even, so it can't be literal. So let's try to, and he was using the sort of heart chakra in all this.
Sure.
Let's accept Judaism as a heart religion and internalize it so that you can behave Jewishly rather than needing to look up everything in terms of, the checklist of what's right and wrong. But then Christianity became, what it is in America, which is, again, another checklist. He's right, we're wrong, this right, he's right.
And then the book of
really
Genesis
hard.
becomes a kind of science text in response to Darwinism in the 1800s as well, which is something that was never intended to be used for as well. That was another death blow, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I think you're dead on, and one of the things that I talk with my religion students about regularly, we use the story of Jacob wrestling with Malach Yahweh, with the angel of the Lord, and we talk about that story as a literal story. Okay, like this happened in history. Sometime, 3,500 years ago, a guy somewhere in the Middle East wrestled all night on the ground with God. Right, they had a wrestling match all night, and I go into the Brokeback Mountain kind of implication there, right? Like, why were they wrestling all night? Why was it all night? And why did it take God that long to beat this guy up? And aren't Jews kind of badass if it takes God that long to fight one? And right, we talk about all the absurd implications of the literal story, and then I ask them now the second thing is, how does this help you with your life? How does this help you be a better husband, a better neighbor, a better coworker, a better student? Right? How do you live a meaningful, purpose-driven, ethical life, knowing that some guy rolled around on the ground 3,500 years ago with an angel? And then they struggle to come to some meaning there, right? But then as soon as they open themselves to the symbol, what is it to struggle with God, right? What is it to wrestle alongside and against God? I tell them the story of the manna from heaven story, and people think manna must be this delicious sourdough bread or something. You think bread from heaven, it's probably delicious, right? But what biblical archaeology shows is that this was, you might know this was an insect excrement that would dry on these leaves that they found in the peninsula, and this white paste that they could scrape off with a rock, add a little bit of moisture to it, and they would dry and make these cakes that were protein rich that they can eat. And they were thanking God for this, right? These dried cakes of bug shit. And so to wrestle with God doesn't always mean to wrestle against God. It means to wrestle the goodness out of a situation too, even if it seems very dark. And so as soon as the students can open up to the metaphor, to the symbol, it becomes profoundly more immediate and alive for them. And it goes against everything they've been taught in evangelical churches to overinterpret these things as historically true and nothing more. It literally drains them of all of their blood. I don't know. Is there a question in that? Feel free to comment on that. Sorry.
No, it's just it's our nature, but it's we do it with everything. I mean, so now I've got a friend who started this coding platform for kids called Ready. And it's basically a drag and drop interface through which you can make little programs or games or things without knowing Java or Python. And the diehard orthodox code educators are sort of up in arms, saying, no, this is terrible. The kids must learn the real code. They must learn the real thing. Computer science is being corrupted by these, too easy, coding light, pop coding solutions. And I kind of beg to differ. I mean, I would love if everyone had the time and energy to learn how to really code and all that. But there's a certain point, people who know code don't know chip architecture and machine language.
Right.
There's a point at which learning how to author something and the authoring tools that we have for these new media, create more accessibility and all. And that's sort of the way I think we have to look at religion or almost anything, is that, yeah, they will become democratized, and when they do, there'll be a simplicity to it, but it's the obligation of the people making the tools and the translations, for the level above them or below them, depending on how you look at it, to do that, responsibly and openly. And that's really, that's the responsibility of the so-called priest class. Any medium or religion, is a priest class has to be humble enough to realize that we are maybe specialized in one thing, and then we have to bring that specialization, not like angry alpha nerds, but like loving, humble people, to everybody else. And if we don't, then we end up with really stupid people and angry people who will eventually do these kind of populist revolts, in some cases founded populist results, but uninformed by the intelligence they really need to enact them.
That's fascinating. Before we go to our first break, one more question, but just a comment on that. People said that coding argument is the same argument people made at the beginning of the electronic music revolution, right? That these aren't real musicians, this isn't real music, this doesn't count, this isn't authentic art. So I find that fascinating. What you said about Judaism being a tool to transcend Judaism, it reminded me of, it's a very Buddhist concept, that Buddhism is there to help you transcend Buddhism. It's this raft that helps you across a great chasm, and the first thing you do once you're across that chasm is abandon the raft.
Yeah, it was one of my main points with that book, was to say, I was upset that lapsed Jews like me were getting blamed for killing this religion. And I saw people like me who were not spending their time, worshiping in the synagogue, but were out working for the ACLU or for tax reform or to feed the hungry or the Peace Corps or American Jewish World Service.
Yeah.
That was Judaism in action. And to criticize those people as lapsed might be backwards. That those people who are actually enacting social justice in the real world, helping others, feeding the hungry and healing the sick, that they might be acting more Jewishly than the person, sitting in the synagogue praying all day.
Is that still how you feel about your Judaism? Because I think you're profoundly right here again. There's something amazingly horizontal about the teachings of Torah. I think there's some 1,100 references, true religion is feeding the widow and orphan and things like this. And, just even the accountability of biblical kings who harm people or try to kill a husband and take the wife, as in David's case. Nowhere in the ancient world was a king held accountable by a religious prophet saying that God is looked upon what you've done as wicked. I mean, prior to that, a king could do whatever they want, and they were the spokesperson of God. But this profoundly horizontal nature of the religion, I think, is something that you were speaking to. So where are you with your Judaism now? Are you kind of in the same place since you wrote that book?
I guess so. I look at Judaism as fuel, that you use what you need to get yourself off your bum and out in the world doing stuff.
Yeah.
And it's great to have it, certainly to have gotten it as a kid, to have some of its ideals, some of its mimetic structures embedded in the way I think.
Sure.
That's what led me to write books like Program or Be Programmed,
Right.
10 Commands for a Digital Age.
Sure.
That sort of updates the 10 Commandments as commands for people to enact, rather than rules for people to follow. Or, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the things that have put me on the top 10 list for MIT are really just Jewishly informed ideas of literacy and participation, of agency and autonomy, all about trying to make the world a more just place. But I think I'm doing it. I'm just less. I'm less concerned with who or what gets credit for these ideas. And that's the thing. I remember speaking to Jewish funders way back when, these guys who spend millions of dollars doing various Jewish causes, and they wanted me to come up with a mechanism to help reinvent Judaism for the 21st century. And I came up with this thing called Reboot that a lot of people have done. It's basically an open space invitation to discuss, what is Judaism and what do we want it to be, and to just be in charge of the whole thing.
Cool.
And remake Judaism for a generation. And I asked the guy, how would you feel if everybody in the world did every Jewish thing, followed all the Jewish commandments and sang all the Jewish songs, but didn't know it was Judaism? Would that be okay with you? And he said, absolutely not. I was like, okay, I get it then.
This is another kind of brand building then at that point.
Yeah. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're going to go to our break here, and when we get back, I actually want to jump into a few questions about present shock and then spend the last of our time talking about throwing rocks. Is that all right with you?
Cool.
Awesome. All right, folks, you are listening to On the Block Radio. Our guest is Douglas Rushkoff, and we will be right back after these words.
You okay?
Yeah, all good. Great.
What?
My roommate's going out of town tomorrow, so if we want to come back here after Erlich's party.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. That sounds good to me.
All right, it's a date.
See you then.
Richard, what's wrong?
Nothing. Literally, it's all good. Come on.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry.
Your roommates are right. You really hate spaces.
No. I don't. It's not hate. Hate's a strong word. Truth be told, I do have a slight preference for tabs, but that's only because I'm anal and because I prefer precision.
Well, not to pick a fight here, but if you really care about precision, wouldn't you use spaces? But whatever. Once it goes through the compiler, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, technically, yes. I guess I just don't understand why anyone would use spaces over tabs. Like, if it's all the same, well, why not just use tabs?
Because it could look different on other people's computers.
Tabs create smaller file sizes, all right? I run a compression company. Trust me, I've devoted my life to minimalizing file sizes. It's what I do. I mean, I do not get why anyone would use spaces over tabs. I mean, why not just use Vim over Emacs?
I do use Vim over Emacs.
Oh, God help us. Okay, you know what? I don't think this is gonna work. I'm so sorry. I mean, like, what? We're gonna bring kids into this world with that over the heads? That's not really fair to them, don't you think?
Kids? We haven't even slept together.
And guess what? It's never gonna happen now, because there is no way I'm gonna be with someone who uses spaces over tabs.
Richard!
Wow, okay. Goodbye. 1 tab saves you 8 spaces.
Oh my God. Richard, what happened?
I just tried to go down the stairs 8 steps at a time. I'm okay, though.
See you around, Richard.
Just making a point.
Hello, this is Tiffany Schlane. I'm a filmmaker and founder of the Webby Award, and you're listening to On the Block Radio.
All right, folks, we are back. You're listening to On the Block Radio. This is your host, Andy Gurvich, and we're speaking with Douglas Rushkoff. I wanted to ask you a few questions about the book Present Shock. That was your previous book, right? Before Google throwing rocks with the Google bus. The premise of the book, for our listeners that don't know it, and we're going to put links to your site and to all of these texts that we talk about on our page.
Cool.
But what's the premise of Present Shock? And then I have a few questions about it.
I don't know if I know the premise. I know maybe I know the conclusion.
What's the conclusion? Yeah, that's even better.
Well, I mean, the idea, I guess, of the book is that we're living in a kind of an eternal present, an always-on reality, and it's partly about technology. We have technologies that have been turned towards extracting value from people as attention. So where digital technologies originally would have made more time for us, you don't have to answer an email when it comes in, but you can answer the email at your leisure, was the original promise of the net.
Yeah.
We've turned it from that asynchronous medium into an always-on thing that's interrupting us constantly, to the point where people think that they're missing out on something if they're having fun with their friends but don't know what the other people are doing on Facebook at that moment.
Yeah.
So there's that assault, that interruptive assault. This is a state of perpetual emergency interruption where the phone is vibrating and people are updating you, and you live in that state that only 911 operators or air traffic controllers used to have to endure. So there's that on the one hand, and then there's also sort of as a society, when we crossed over that threshold from the 19s to the 20s, there was a weird sense that we're here now. We are in the future that we'd been looking forward to for so long. And the dot-com boom busted, and the Y2K bug didn't really happen, and the 2012 didn't really happen. We're just sort of here.
Right.
And so those two things sort of combined to put us in a state of what I'm calling present shock, which is this really an inability to make sense. We don't have narratives. We don't have stories. We don't have goals anymore. We're just trying to kind of handle the moment as it occurs.
That's what you mean by narrative collapse in the book, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, narrative collapse is the idea that, we don't have stories with beginnings, middles, and ends anymore. We live in a post-Simpsons universe where we don't really care about how the story ends. We're kind of watching it moment to moment to see what's being satired, what's being referenced here. We're just trying to do pattern recognition, and it's on a certain level, it's great because it means we're not gonna want to fight these eyes on the prize, ends justify the means battles. It's very hard to hold up an ideal and say, "Come, everyone, follow me," toward this great goal. This is not a society where you can say we're going to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth,
right,
and it's over when they stick the flag in the surface of the moon. We don't have that sense of completion, of finality anymore. But at the same time, it opens up the possibility for more bottom up, less in some ways less idealistic, less ends oriented movements like Occupy. It prepares us to deal with more chronic problems like the environment or terrorism or poverty or hunger. Rather than thinking, we're going to declare a war on hunger and beat it, we're realizing, no, this is something that we have to stay, consciously concerned about.
Right, so that's a good thing, but the negative side of that has been the kind of psychology of always having to be on. I was thinking about even Facebook Messenger and things tells people when you've looked at the message they've sent. And so, if you don't write back immediately, they know you've seen it and haven't responded. And so there's all these relational implications now for the digital media. It reaches into
and that's because because we're optimizing our platforms for the extraction of value from people rather than the creation of value for people. The point is they want you on there. They want you paranoid. They want you stuck using this stuff, and that's the relationship I'm trying to change. Whether it's by talking to people through present shock about you've got to. You can embrace these technologies, but you have to do it as human beings.
Yeah.
You have to look at how are they serving you in your life or your work? Are they helping you or are you helping them? Who is programming whom? And then in the most recent book, in Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, what I'm doing is really talking largely to technology developers to say, wait a minute, have you just surrendered your idea to Wall Street? Have you just pivoted away from the value that you were going to create for people with that great app and instead just turned into another, stock market darling? Are you just trying to extract value from people and places so you can sell your company to another level of investors, which is what most of these companies are doing now?
I want to pivot over to that because we only have a few minutes left with you, but one more question about Present Shock, and then we'll spend the last of our time on Throwing Rocks. You said a couple of things there that were fascinating to me, this moving away from linear stories. I just was looking at Slavoj Zizek put a tweet up yesterday complaining about how he won't become linear at anyone's request and stop asking him to do a TED Talk. He was very upset that people keep asking him to do a TED Talk, and this was the reason, is our obsession with linearity. And we could probably spend an hour on Zizek, and so I won't go into that. But
well, the reason why you shouldn't want to do a TED Talk is if you do a TED Talk, you're supposed to have the friggin' answer.
Right.
And and the whole idea of a TED Talk is here's the answer in 10 minutes or less. If you could fix the world with a tweet, someone would have done it already.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a long process. There is no end. As long as you're alive, you can keep making the world better. You can keep, and the fact that a place like TED, they won't let someone like me talk at TED.
Yeah.
They won't let Naomi Klein talk at TED because these are anti-corporate messages. These are messages that are saying, no, there's not a little gizmo. I can't show you the 2-minute video of us making all the little starving children in India happy now. With our new piece of, solar cell phone technology. It's just not real.
Your insight real quick before we switch over, Chronos time versus Kairos time, and this notion, I really think when people start thinking about their time online, not as distraction, but as time investment, and realizing that our time is really the most valuable thing we have. And when we give it to these companies so mindlessly and so regularly, we really are falling into this trap. So you can maybe speak to that, and then 1 or 2 questions on Google Bus, and then we'll let you go.
Yeah, I love that you say.
What's that?
Explain Chronos and Kairos real quick.
Yeah. 45 seconds.
Says it right there.
In a tweet.
I just did it. That exemplifies it in some ways.
Right.
The Greeks had two...
Hey, you're the one that's got to get to a softball game, man.
Yeah,
I got all day.
Had two words for time. There was Chronos, which is time on the clock.
Right.
What time did you crash the car? It was 4:27.
Right.
And then they had this other notion of time called kairos, which meant more like readiness, the kind of time that only human beings can perceive. It would be, what time do you tell dad that you crashed the car? 4:29? There's not a time on the clock that you tell him. You tell him after he's had his drink and before he's opened the bills. It's this human understanding of time. And I feel like in a digital culture, we tend to think of things in terms of chronos. How much can I get done? What is the time on the clock? How much time is left? What is this? What is the duration? And we lose touch with chronos. But chronos is where human beings have their power. Chronos is the kind of time that only people get. Corporations can't understand it. Computers can't understand it, but human beings do. And so what it's the underlying cycles, the cycles, the heartbeat, the day and night, the lunar cycles, the seasonal cycles, the time, the clocks that human beings have evolved to be in sync with over hundreds of thousands of years that we don't take into account when we attempt to use digital time or a Google Calendar to organize our lives. We lose touch with those rhythms, and I'm arguing that those rhythms are what make us more powerful. Those rhythms are what allow us to act in sync with one another. They're the cycles that ancient cultures understood and Aboriginal cultures still do, and they're the sorts of cycles that allow people to forge solidarity and community and connection to other humans.
So you would, obviously, and you've written and spoken on this extensively, but just to piggyback on that, then you would step away from Kurzweil and the folks that are talking about transhumanists and the singularity and all that, and you're saying no, absolutely not.
Well, I wouldn't step away from them. I never stepped toward them.
Yeah.
I understand life is really hard and death is really scary.
Yeah.
And the idea of uploading yourself to a computer and getting to live forever is really tempting. And it's in some ways easier to work toward that than making the world a better place. You get to go in a nice air-conditioned Google place and build a giant computer and do TED Talks about the future. And, there's something fun about that.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about women and stuff. Oh my
Right.
God, because you're a machine, or just get a robot girl, or there are these fantasies, and I understand where they come from, and they're sweet in a way. And I understand that these people, they're looking at global warming and the environment, and they understand that the human race may be doomed, and they're looking for an escape hatch. Whether it's let's get 10 people off the planet and starseed Mars, or let's get Ray Kurzweil's brain into Google's mainframe.
Yeah.
But these folks, they look at it almost as this good and inevitable thing, that computers are going to get more complex as they learn more than we do, and then human beings will only be important insofar as we can keep the machines going. And that's just not a perspective I can sign on to. I still think, and call it hubris if you must, but I still think human beings are special, and that that we should try to keep the planet and our civilization hospitable to humans, rather than just letting us go extinct, or intentionally letting us go extinct and become replaced by the machines. Only because I don't think it's possible. I don't think machines are conscious.
Yeah.
I think they are thinking, but they're not aware. And there's just some special place for us that I would like to keep. I'd like to keep going.
In throwing rocks at the Google bus, and I would love to go off with you on consciousness for a bit here, but we just have about 6 minutes left here, so I want to get into the new book. In this book, you argue that we have failed to build the distributed economy that the digital networks that they're capable of fostering, and even early on were proclaiming would happen, and instead have doubled down on this industrial age mandate of growth above all. And you've talked extensively about like Airbnb and Uber and these things, and how they're not really models of this gift economy, but are just extractive in this nature. And so I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that, and what the premise of that book, or the conclusion, either one, and what you're trying to say in this book. I've heard you say that it's the most important book you've written.
Well, all I'm really arguing in this book is that we still have the potential to develop digital technologies and platforms that help foster a wider distribution of prosperity. That what we've done instead is just confirmed, accelerated, and amplified, the extractive nature of traditional corporate capitalism.
Yeah.
So, we all know Walmart goes to a town, they use their tremendous war chest of money to sell their products at a loss, purely to drive everyone else out of business. So then everyone in that community needs to work for the Walmart in order to have a job. So now that since they're the only employer, they can hire people part-time with no benefits, because it's better to have a little bit of money than none. So that the more people go on welfare, more people need social services, there's no local economy. And eventually, after 10 or 20 or 30 years, the town goes bankrupt, the Walmart closes, and they move to another community and do the same thing. And, when you look at some of the early digital companies like Amazon, they basically did the same thing. They look for the low-hanging fruit, which is the book industry, and they think, let's form a complete monopoly on this book. Let's undercut all the booksellers, and let's, drive the prices down for the authors and the publishers.
Yeah, this wasn't a love of literature that made Bezos.
No, it wasn't. And they because all they wanted to do was establish a monopoly in books so they could leverage that monopoly to move over into what's called another vertical, another industry, whether it's drones or servers or anything
electronics
else.
or anything else.
Right. So they're using extractive corporate capitalism, the kind that's been around since the great colonial empires went to the Americas and to Africa and enslaved people and took their stuff and mined their land and extracted. And it requires growth. That's the only way that works, because really what you're doing is not building a company that has any sort of sustainable market. You're building a company in order to keep selling that company. You sell it to another round of investors and then another round of investors. You want the stock to go up so you can keep selling it.
That's what happens with debt, right? People sell debt over and over and over again. Yeah.
And that's really all it's about. And no one wants to create a sustainable company with actual revenue and give dividends to their shareholders or pay their workers. And that's actually the opportunity here, is to create businesses that are more consonant with value creation. So you look at a company like Twitter, and on the one hand, they achieved it. Twitter, 140 character messaging app, creates enough value for people that this app makes $2 billion a year.
Wow.
And it's of great value to me and to you. We can tell people when there's a new episode of the podcast. I mean, it works. Only it doesn't work for the investors. They're very upset with Twitter because Twitter stopped growing. It turns out $2 billion is about all you can make with a messaging app like that. But they're not allowed to stay that way. Their investors are demanding that they grow. So they're going to have to pivot away from this great value-creating service, this app, and become something else, become something that can be extractive and that can grow. And so really what I'm writing about, what I'm trying to help people see is the problem with that perspective, and giving people, and especially, people who want to start companies or have jobs or do businesses or promote local prosperity, really simple tactics that they can use, to either develop a local currency or to turn their business into a platform cooperative that the workers own, or to make a larger business more distributive and more circulatory. So it's got clues for everyone from heads of state and CEOs down to economic activists who want to try to fight for a more prosperous local economy.
You gave a great example in our final questions here about a pizza place in New York that you gave some advice to about how to grow their business. Can you maybe tell that example? Because I think this is such a practical example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, you take say Luigi's Pizza wants to expand, and they need $100,000 to move into the neighboring storefront and put in a ladies' room and a men's room. Normally they'd go to the bank and borrow $100,000 and have to pay it back in cash. And the bank would ultimately have an extractive function by taking money out of that community and delivering it up to their corporate shareholders. What I would suggest, say, to the bank would be, well, instead of giving Luigi $100,000, why don't you give him $50,000 based on his ability to raise the other $50,000 from his customers. And you could give Luigi an app on the phone so that someone could come into the pizzeria, give him $100 towards the expansion of the restaurant, and then that person will get $120 worth of pizza when the restaurant is expanded. So the investor customer makes 20% on his money in a year, which is better than he's going to do, was throwing his money in Smith Barney. Right. He also gets to make his community a better place. He gets to make his main street better. He gets to increase the tax base, raise his real estate value, make his public schools better, and circulate money within his community rather than outside it. And the bank gets to play a role rather than just as the provider and extractor of capital. The bank gets to be a facilitator of local reinvestment. It gets to be an expert in local reinvestment, which will serve it well if the shit hits the fan and and people really have no purpose for banks because there's no more money left.
Right.
At least banks can participate, and Luigi gets to pay back only half of it it of his money in cash, and the other half in pizza, which is a lot cheaper for him.
For him over
so just
time.
things like that promote the circulation of value through a community. It's a matter of thinking for the banks, thinking how can we help make people rich rather than just how can we get people's money. And that's really how all businesses have to look at this now.
Are people listening to this? I mean, I've heard you say you've gone around the country and given this message to business leaders in the tech industry, and have tried to give them that analogy of like a fish swimming in water. You don't see the culture, you don't see the thing underneath the operating system, this economic operating system that's been in place, as you said, since the dawn of the industrial age. You're still thinking in those terms, and so it's one thing to get people, Luigi to do it, but what about CEOs of Fortune 100 companies?
Yeah, people are listening. I mean, they're listening. In some ways, they're listening too much. I want them to read a little bit. I mean, I'm getting about 1,000 emails a day now.
Yeah.
I'm doing.
Read the book, people.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot to answer. I'm doing, between 6 and 10 interviews or conferences a day on Skype talking to these people. A lot of companies are doing things. The CEO of Chobani decided to give 10%
I saw that.
of his shares to his workers before the IPO of that company. I mean, there's a lot of people, listening to these ideas and willing to try to do stuff. I mean, between, governments and politicians and CEOs, there's a great willingness because the CEOs are losing money. They're not doing well. Their companies are dying. The biggest companies, the corporate profit over corporate size has been going down for 70 years. That means they've got really fat. They're filled with cash, but they don't have a way to deploy it. And they're really open to hearing about these more circulatory distributive models of value creation. It's not about redistributing the spoils of capitalism after the fact. It's about pre-distributing the means of production before the fact. And businesses are coming to recognize, if my customers are rich, they're going to have more money to spend, and that helping them get that basic logic. It's hard at the beginning, but once they get it, they really are on board the idea of making money by doing business rather than making money by scamming other business people.
Awesome. The book is Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, How Growth Became the Enemy of Prosperity. Douglas, I really appreciate you being with us, especially with all the stuff you say you got going on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's
awesome
crazy time, but if people are willing to listen, then you got to strike while that iron's hot, right?
Do you have time to play keyboard still, or do you see Genesis Bjorge much anymore?
No, I want to see him so badly. I've got to make time. I mean, seeing him is a day.
Right?
But yeah.
Hopefully that'll happen for you.
This summer, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being with us. Is there anything you want to add here at the end that we didn't say?
No, it's all good.
We'd love to have you on again down the future if that's possible.
Sure.
Excellent, man.
Sure.
Thank you.
Especially when things quiet down.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Douglas. Have a great day, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to On the Block Radio, folks. Our guest has been Douglas Rushkoff. This is your host, Andy Gurvich, and we will see you on the other side.
I'm on that Google bus. 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 I'm on that Google. And you can find me out in Mountain View, grinding with my Google crew, up inside my cubicle, biting my nails to the cuticle, working overtime, keeping hours that aren't usual. But I can't complain because the ride here was beautiful.
I'm on that Google bus, hanging with the upper crust. I left my Porsche up at the condo with my poodle pups. Got on that Google bus, avoid the traffic rush. High speed Wi-Fi, lots of legroom and the seats are plush.
I'm on that Google bus, going both ways. In the back room got a pair of solid gold bidets. I'm on that Google bus, cashmere towelettes. I'm on that Google bus, omelets and fresh baguettes.
I'm on that Google bus, seats back while we working. Just turn up the algorithm, see 100 nerds twerking on that Google bus. Coffee in our Google cups. I got my YouTube integrated with my Google Plus.
I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google, that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google, that Google bus.
I'm on that Google bus, eating sushi at the drive-thru. Super happy that I didn't take that job at Yahoo. I'm on that Google bus, you're on board. I'm smelling sweet success, you smelling farts. I got my Google ID and my Google Backstage Pass, watching Google TV on my brand new Google Glass. I'm on that Google bus, people shout in the Google chant, bumping bass, Lotto records, doing the Google dance.
I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus.
My Google bus pass up inside my USB while I see that trolls out here wishing that you was me. Haters need to go home and practice code. Internet thugs keep it low, cause I be sitting on Google Chrome.
I'm on that Google bus, I'm getting Google cash. Stock options, bitcoins coming out my Google ass. I'm Google bus pimping and I'm working for a bonus. Just left the Googleplex and the driver's doing donuts.
I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google, that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google bus. I'm on that Google, that Google.
And you can find me out in Mountain View.
What people have to remember is that the object of industrialism wasn't to make more stuff better and faster. It was to disconnect labor from the value they created. So if I have a shoe factory, I don't want to hire expensive shoemakers and cobblers in my business. I want to go to the Home Depot parking lot, find a bunch of undocumented aliens, and pay them 2 cents an hour. So I'm going to teach them something. It's going to take me 15 minutes to teach them how to nail one nail into the shoe and then pass it on to the next guy. The person who understands how this all works is actually my enemy. So you fast forward to today, when we implement digital technologies, we try to do them in ways that get rid of people. We don't want employees. If you need human beings, well then how are you going to scale up? It has to be able to be an algorithm. You know, the easy way to think about it is when most people's first interaction with a computer was probably a telephone answering system. You know, and sure, I understand a company has a human receptionist that's sitting there. You know, she's got a salary, she's got benefits, she's got a health plan. Get rid of her, put in a computer. So people who call your company are going to have to take a little bit more time to get through all those menus. You're going to save a lot of money, and it makes you look kind of high tech. But while you save money, everybody who calls the company now spends more time going through those menus. You've actually created more work rather than less. You've externalized the cost of your human receptionist onto everybody else. So then what do? Well, now they all have to get computer operators because they have to externalize the cost to everybody else. So we all end up now spending more time and energy going through those menus than we did when we hired somebody. But because we're so biased against hiring, because the company's stock price will go up if it can show that it's hired less people, we end up perpetuating that system. So when we implement digital technologies in order to get people out of the way, in order to get them out of the company, we end up really killing the only expertise we have. If you're using algorithms and big data to figure out your next product line rather than designers, what's your competitive advantage? The other company's using that same data and probably hiring the same big data analytics company to figure out the future trends. So now you've been turned into a commodity. No, you've got to reverse in a digital age. What you want is the most qualified people you can find so that your business actually can differentiate itself from all of the other automated, algorithmic, nonsensical platforms out there. What consumers have to understand is that there's a value proposition with everything that they use. They have to be able, and currently they can't, they have to be able to ask themselves, is this platform creating value for me, or am I creating value for it? Or is there an exchange that I'm aware of and I'm okay with? Do I want to run my social life on Facebook? Is this an exchange that I like? Do I like defining myself in that way? Do I like these radio buttons? Do I want to present myself to the world through this platform? And am I okay with everything they know about me? I don't know. Am I okay with me getting my news and information through a news feed that's algorithmically optimized to make me click on things, to narrow and figure out who I am? Am I okay living on a platform that's using past data about me to advertise and market a future to me that I haven't yet decided to go live? If they know there's a 70 or 80% chance that I might go on a diet in a month, what are they going to do? They start filling my newsfeed with, hey, you're looking kind of fat, something's wrong with you. And they're going to try to steer me to be more consistent with my profile, to make me a more predictable and cooperative consumer. I guess that's okay as long as maybe it was a diet and so they're going to encourage me to go on it. But what about the other 20% of people? What about what I might have done instead? What about that unpredictability that would have made me different from the next guy and let me innovate something? Let me have a new idea. Let me have a more interesting, personal, anomalous, weird life. Well, maybe I'm okay to surrender that. Maybe I want to be more like the rest of my statistical profile. But at least I should know this. At least I should know that my Google search results are different from yours. Why? Because Google wants me to do something. Google wants me to be a certain way. Google wants to help me be the real me. But how do they know what the real me is? What's the algorithm they're using, and to what end?
You've been listening to On the Block Radio with Andrew Gurovich. The show is produced in Portland, Oregon by Michael DiNapoli at MD Productions. Theme music by Moving the Mountain. Closing music by Jonathan Oak. Look us up on the web at ontheblockradio.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't forget to tune in next week for a brand new episode. Previous episodes can be found on our website. Thanks for listening.
Oh, you're beautiful kitty kitties. Oh, look at you out there. Beauty like a bolt of light in a darkened hallway. New minds looking at this world, at our lives, with the perspective of apocalypse children. Standing dusty in the barren highways, standing broken before the fathers who are meant to make us whole, but who only lied to us about what it meant to be a man, about what it meant to be a woman, about what it meant